In this session, I want to talk about the nature of faith. One of the most common objections to faith that I have gotten from skeptics is it goes something along the lines of, well, there's not enough evidence. I just don't have enough evidence to believe. I don't have enough evidence to have faith. And there seems to be this assumption among a lot of unbelievers, among a lot of skeptics, that faith doesn't actually even look for evidence at all. That people of faith, they don't care about evidence. There's a quote here I want to read. This is from a man named Sam Harris. Sam Harris is a prominent author, prominent atheist. He wrote a book called A Letter to a Christian Nation. And he says this: tell a devout Christian that his wife is cheating on him or that frozen yogurt can make a man invisible, and he's likely to require as much evidence as anyone else. However, tell him that the book he keeps by his bed was written by an invisible deity who will punish him for eternity if he fails to accept its every incredible claim about the universe, and he seems to require no evidence whatsoever. Now, I've got a lot of issues with that quote, but one of my biggest issues is the assertion that Christians have faith despite not having any evidence, that there are no reasons, there's no evidence to support faith. There's this fundamental misunderstanding about what faith is that's reflected in this quote. I think too many people assume that faith is either certainty, that faith requires certainty, or, on the other hand, that faith is just blind, that there's no evidence or justification whatsoever. But both of those, I think, are a misunderstanding of what faith is. Faith is neither certain nor blind. I think one of the best ways of understanding faith is that faith is about confidence. Faith is about confidence. Now, it invites the question, though, how do we become confident in anything? Well, there's really two ways that we become confident. One way is through external confirmation, but another way is through internal confirmation. So we become confident in something by external confirmation. We see something, we observe something, there's good evidence to believe it, but there's also an internal confirmation. We've come to believe it personally. There's a good example of this in Hebrews chapter 2 in the New Testament. In Hebrews 2, verses 3 and 4, here's what we read. Now, the book of Hebrews was written to a group of Christians who are struggling in their faith, okay? They're struggling with perseverance. And so here's what we read. This salvation, which was first announced by the Lord, was confirmed to us by those who heard him. God also testified to it by signs, wonders, and various miracles. So let me just stop right there. Do you hear the external confirmation? The author of Hebrews is saying, hey, remember the testimony that you've received. Remember the reliability of those witnesses. Also, remember the miracles that have actually happened in your midst. So that all of that is aimed at external confirmation. There's good reasons for you to continue to believe what you believe, but he also adds a note about internal confirmation here at the very end. Again, in verse 4, he says, and by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. So he reminds them that the Holy Spirit is also doing something within them. He's doing something in their midst as well. So there's both external and internal confirmation that should give these believers confidence in what they believe. Later on in the book of Hebrews, in chapter 11, this famous chapter about faith, he begins this chapter by offering a short, succinct definition for faith. And he says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not yet see. So faith isn't absolute ironclad certainty, but faith is also not blind. The rest of this chapter, Hebrews chapter 11, is full of examples of people like Moses and Noah, and on the line we go, examples of people who live with this type of confident faith. I would argue that all people, Sam Harris included, all people live their lives by some sort of faith. Now, maybe it's not a religious faith necessarily, but all people live their lives with this type of confident faith based on external and internal confirmation. Let me just give you an example of this. Think about the example of getting sick. Okay? When you get sick, the only thing that you know for sure is that you don't feel well. You have internal confirmation that you don't feel well. Okay? And so you go to the doctor. And you tell the doctor, hey, I'm not feeling good. My stomach's hurting, whatever. And so the doctor says, okay, we're going to figure out what's wrong with you. And so the doctor looks inside your mouth. You think to yourself, well, the problem's in my stomach, not my mouth, but I'm going to trust that the doctor knows what she's doing. And so the doctor does the whole examination, and you trust that the doctor knows what she's doing. You trust that the doctor knows what she's talking about. At the end of the examination, she says, okay, I've got bad news. A microscopic invisible organism has invaded your body. A virus has invaded your body and is making you unwell. The good news, though, is that there's a cure for this. I'm going to write you a prescription. You take this prescription to the pharmacist, and it'll get cleared up shortly. And so you follow the doctor's instructions. You take this prescription to the pharmacist. You don't know the pharmacist personally. You don't know his qualifications or his expertise. You just trust that he knows what he's doing. You give him the piece of paper. He comes from the back with a bottle full of pills. You have no idea what's in the pills. You don't even know how to pronounce the pills. Okay, but the pharmacist says you take these pills once a day, you'll start to feel better. They will counteract the invisible organism that's invaded your body. And so you do this. And sure enough, you start to feel better. Now, that entire process from beginning to end, we think that it's just about science or reason or medicine or whatever, and indeed it is. But it's also about confident faith. Now, it's a reasonable confidence. You have both external and internal confirmation for that confidence, but it is nevertheless a type of faith. All people, not just religious people, live by some sort of faith in their life. I like to compare faith to the process of getting married. Now, if you think about marriage, marriage is a commitment based on confidence. Marriage is not blind, but neither is marriage absolutely certain. Now, when we go into marriage, when we begin marriage, we have up to that point, we've gone through a season of getting to know each other as well as possible. And then we enter into that wedding day, and the preacher looks at you and says, will you? And you say, I do. And he looks at your spouse and says, will you? And she says, I do as well. And so you're married, but those of us who are married know that on your wedding day, you don't have absolute certainty about everything that you're saying I do to. Because every day that you're married is a day of discovery. It's a day of learning. You discover something about your spouse. You discover something about yourself. You discover something about yourself in this relationship. It's a day of learning. Every day is a day of learning. It's a day of discovery. And so faith is sort of the same way. Faith in God. We don't enter into faith blindly. We don't enter into faith without having good reasons, good confirmations for this that give us confidence. But at the same time, when we enter into faith in God, it's not like our questions all of a sudden go away. It's not as if everything is resolved and everything is taken care of and we never have to worry about any sort of questions. No, that's not what faith is. When I enter into faith with God, I enter into a journey, a lifetime journey of discovery, where every day hopefully I learn something new about God. I learn something new about myself. Every day, I might be given new questions that I never even considered on that day when I started following Jesus. But now I have this new question that I'm exploring, that I'm seeking out. That's what a life of faith really is. I still have confidence in God. I still have confidence in his not just in his existence, but also in his love for me. I haven't lost that confidence, but I'm living each day discovering something new. Now, we know people in our lives, right? Who Maybe they've been together with their boyfriend or their girlfriend for a long time, and you'll ask them, are you at some point going to get married? And sometimes the answer is, well, maybe eventually, but we feel like we need to get to know each other a little bit better. If we just know each other better, or if we just get established a little bit, but if we just do this, then maybe at that point, then we'll decide to get married. How often do those people end up actually getting married? Sadly, not very often. Because you'll never get to the point where you'll ever feel confident enough to make that leap to get married. And the same thing is true with a lot of skeptics, with a lot of unbelievers who say, if there was just a little bit more evidence, if I just had a little bit more external confirmation, just a little bit more, then I could be convinced to believe. And sadly, in so many cases, you could give them evidence after evidence after. One of the questions that I like to ask skeptics is what even counts as evidence? What would count as sufficient evidence for you actually? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever considered that? Because you could give evidence after evidence after evidence, but at the end of the day, they still keep God at a distance because no evidence is enough, because what they're looking for isn't faith. What they're looking for is certainty. And so one of the things that I like to challenge skeptics with is just on this definition of faith. Faith isn't certainty. None of us live our lives with that type of expectation. Instead, can I present to you a faith that you can at least be confident in? Can I give you some external confirmation for faith? And can I maybe talk to you about the internal confirmation that I've received, so that we can get to the point of confidence? Now, I want to switch gears here at the very end of this session, because I think it's important to also, I want to talk to believers at this point about this topic right here, just very quickly. Because if you live a life of faith, you will at some point or another struggle with doubt. It's just inevitable. If you're taking your faith seriously, and if you're walking with God every day, there will be those moments of wonder. There will be those moments of where you have questions that don't have really good answers. There will be periods of doubt and trials in your life. So how do you deal with those doubts? And I just want to give you a few suggestions here at the very end on how to think about and how to deal with those doubts. Here's the first thing. Acknowledge your doubts. Acknowledge your doubts. Don't try to hide them. Don't try to run away from them. It's okay to ask questions. I tell this to my students all the time. God is a God of truth. And so God is honored when we ask questions and pursue truth. So acknowledge the doubts that you're having. And I think it'd also be important along these lines to ask, is this a first order doubt or a second order doubt? And let me just explain to you the difference. A first order doubt would be something like, I don't even know if God exists. I don't even know if there is a God. That's a first order doubt. That's a serious doubt. A second order doubt would be something along the lines of, I read Genesis 1 and 2. I'm not sure I understand exactly what it's saying about creation in Genesis 1 and 2. I have some doubts about that. I have some questions about that. That's a second order doubt. It doesn't mean that it's unimportant, but it's not exactly the same thing as saying, you know what, I'm not even sure that God exists. So acknowledge your doubt, name your doubt, okay? Here's another suggestion to you. Try to identify the source of your doubt. Is the source of your doubt purely intellectual? Is the source for your doubt emotional? Has something happened in your life that's caused an emotional reaction that then is having an effect on what you believe about God? Just like when we're talking to a skeptic, we have to assess where their doubt is coming from. We also have to assess where our doubts are coming from. And can I tell you one source of doubt quite often in the believer's life is unconfessed sin. When we're struggling with our own sin, when we're struggling with our own brokenness, and as a way of dealing with our brokenness, we transfer that over towards God and we say, well, maybe God doesn't even exist because we have this sin that's just sort of eating away at us. Acknowledge the source of your doubt. Name the source of your doubt. Honestly seek answers. Do not use your doubt as a justification for walking away from God. Again, go back to this marriage illustration. If you're married, you don't use a bad day or a fight with your spouse as some sort of justification to say, you know what, I just give up. There's no good reason to stay in this relationship any longer. No, a bad day or a bad fight is an opportunity for you to fix that relationship, to heal that relationship, maybe to humble yourself and bring that relationship back to health. The same is true about asking questions or having doubts about God. Acknowledge those doubts, don't run away from them, but also don't use them as some sort of cheap justification for just walking away from God. No, if you have a question, honestly seek out wisdom and seek out answers to that question. And then lastly, I would say be careful about the weaker brother when expressing your doubts. Some people are better equipped to handle doubts than others. And so when you are struggling with doubt in your faith, I would just give you a bit of caution to exercise wisdom about how you express that doubt and who you express that doubt to. Because if you express that doubt in the wrong way and to the wrong person, it could have a devastating impact on that person. And so I've got to be sensitive to how I express those doubts and who I express those doubts to. So acknowledge your doubts. Acknowledge the source of your doubts, seek out wisdom, seek out answers for those doubts, and be cautious and wise about your weaker brother when it comes to expressing those doubts.